Neil, what is confidential invoice discounting?
Well, Dave, confidential invoice discounting is essentially a debt facility. So it's very much like debt factoring, which is a term that people might be more familiar with. So you're borrowing money against the asset on your balance sheet, which is somebody else's promise to pay you money. Now, the interesting feature of confidential invoice discounting is that it's a revolving credit facility. So what that means is you repay it as the debtor repays you, but then as long as your business continues trading, you have another customer who you raise another debtor. So your debt facility just keeps revolving. And therefore, you know, if you're a steady state business, you've got a couple of £1 million worth of invoice discounting debt, you just carry on having that debt. There's no actual requirement from the bank to pay it back.
And who offers this debt?
Well, confidential invoice discounting is often is offered by most asset-backed lenders. So most of the high street banks will offer it in their commercial departments or their corporate departments, and then there are some specialist asset-backed lenders, notably GE, people like that. So there's a number of lenders that offer it, and actually it's an increasingly popular form of debt. Obviously, since the credit crunch, it provides the lender with a greater degree of security.
What are the benefits of CID?
Well, there are a number of benefits. I mean, the most obvious one is that you can get it. So, you know, whereas in 2008 the kind of world ended in terms of credit terms, and it's improved quite a lot since then. It is much more readily available in terms of asset-backed lending in general, but certainly confidential invoice discounting. You know, one of the second benefits I guess is that it's a revolving facility. So, you know, if you were, for example, funding a management buyout and doing it through a CID facility, then you wouldn't need to factor into your financial model going forward the necessity to pay back the debt. Whereas if it was a term loan, you'd need to find the money in your profits to repay that term loan over 6 years. With a confidential invoice discounting facility, you wouldn't need that. And a third benefit really is that it grows with the business. So, you know, when a business grows, it sucks in cash, but it sucks a lot of that cash into debtors. If you're using your debtors to finance your debt facility, so your debt facility, then actually it's self-propelling. As you grow and require more cash to support working capital, your working capital gives you a greater ability to raise debt. So it can be a very useful tool. It's you know, factoring, which is confidential invoice discounting without the confidentiality effectively, is a very popular tool for recruitment businesses that work on, you know, contract recruitment. They can grow very fast and suck up a huge amount of working capital, and these kind of facilities are very flexible for that.
Are there any downsides to confidential invoice discounting?
Well, one potential downside is that there are certain sectors where you can't get it. So, for example, you know, banks talk about a gone situation, so a situation where the company goes into liquidation and they want to make sure that they can recover their debt. So there are certain sectors where the debtor book actually doesn't really stand up to that test. So a good example of that is any business that has long-term contracts. Most notably, I'd say certain areas of the construction industry. So, for example, you know, you might be building a whole building and you'd invoice on progress payments, and therefore you'd have debtors, but ultimately you've just got a hole in the ground. So then if your business goes bust and you try to argue, well, there's value in the hole in the ground and therefore you have to pay our debtors, you're not going to get very far. So banks are very reluctant to fund long-term contracts on a CID basis.
How can I find out more about CID?
Well, actually, there's a website called Corporate Finance Television, which has a number of interviews with asset-backed lenders and people who offer confidential invoice discounting. So if you go there, then you can actually hear, not from an advisor like me, but from an actual, you know, banker, exactly what that's about, what they're interested in investing in, and how to move forward. And there are also some tutorials about raising debt.